Captain Sarah stared at the notification on her data pad with growing confusion. The Galactic Educational Exchange Program had accepted her application, but there had to be some kind of mistake. According to the message, she was enrolled in something called quantum consciousness manipulation, a course that the accompanying notes described as theoretically impossible for carbon-based life forms to comprehend. The human colony ship Persistence had been traveling through the Andromeda spiral for 3 months when they first made contact with the collective. The aliens were tall, crystalline beings who communicated through harmonic frequencies and seemed genuinely surprised that humans had developed faster-than-light travel without first mastering what they called the fundamental consciousness arts. Sarah had only applied for the exchange program because Command thought it would be good diplomacy. Earth needed allies in this sector, and controlled several key trade routes. She was supposed to take basic courses in galactic law and communication. Instead, she found herself walking through the gleaming corridors of the Academy, following a floating crystal entity that hummed constantly in frequencies that made her teeth ache. "Your dormitory assignment is most unusual," the entity said, its voice somehow translating directly into her mind, despite the universal translator remaining silent. "Humans have never been permitted in the Transcendence Wing before. The consciousness manipulation track requires mental flexibility that your species theoretically lacks." The dormitory was a marvel of architecture that seemed to exist in more dimensions than Sarah could properly perceive. Crystalline walls shifted between transparent and opaque seemingly at random, and the floors had a peculiar quality that made her feel like she was walking on solid light. Her room was Spartan by human standards, but apparently luxurious by one's, featuring a sleep alcove that hummed with healing frequencies, and a study area equipped with what looked like a 3-dimensional holographic library. Her first class was scheduled for the next morning, and Sarah spent the evening trying to understand what exactly quantum consciousness manipulation was supposed to involve. The course materials were written in a form of mathematics that hurt to look at directly, filled with symbols that seemed to squirm when she wasn't focusing on them completely. The basic premise, as far as she could understand, involved using one's consciousness to directly manipulate quantum states at the subatomic level. According to the texts, advanced practitioners could alter the fundamental properties of matter simply by thinking about it in the correct way. The most skilled masters could supposedly restructure entire objects, create energy from nothing, and even manipulate the flow of time itself. It sounded like magic to Sarah, but they insisted it was a precise science based on the intersection of quantum mechanics and consciousness theory. When morning came, Sarah made her way to the lecture hall with a growing sense of apprehension. The room was filled with beings from across the galaxy, floating gas clouds that sparkled with internal lightning, creatures with multiple sets of eyes that tracked independently, and tall, ethereal beings that seemed to be made of pure energy. She was the only human present, and possibly the only solid, carbon-based life form in the entire class. Professor was a master whose crystalline body pulsed with deep blue light. He stood at the front of the classroom next to what appeared to be a large chunk of raw iron ore. His introduction was brief and intimidating. "Welcome to quantum consciousness manipulation," he said, his mental voice reaching every student simultaneously. "This course has a failure rate of 97% among species considered naturally gifted in consciousness arts. For carbon-based life forms, the theoretical failure rate approaches 100%. You will learn to reshape reality itself through pure mental discipline, or you will burn out your neural pathways in the attempt." He gestured to the iron ore. "Your first exercise is simple. Use your consciousness to alter the atomic structure of this metal. Transform it into gold through quantum manipulation. You have the entire semester to accomplish this task. Most of you will never succeed." Sarah raised her hand, feeling foolish. "Professor, I'm not sure I understand the basic principles involved. How exactly does consciousness interact with quantum states?" A ripple of what might have been laughter passed through the alien students. Professor Slight shifted to a curious green. "An interesting question from our human student. Consciousness, you see, exists at the quantum level. Your thoughts, your awareness, your very sense of self, these are quantum phenomena that can be trained to influence other quantum systems. The key is achieving perfect mental clarity while maintaining precise control over your quantum signature." He demonstrated by placing one crystalline appendage on the iron ore. The metal began to shimmer and shift, its dull gray surface becoming brighter and more lustrous. Within moments, The professor had transformed a corner of the ore into gleaming gold. The process requires absolute focus, complete emotional control, and a deep understanding of both your own consciousness and the quantum nature of the target material. Carbon-based life forms struggle because their biological processes create constant quantum interference. Your emotions, your involuntary thoughts, your very metabolism generates quantum noise that disrupts the delicate manipulations required. Sarah stared at the partially transformed ore, her mind racing. The explanation made a strange kind of sense, but it also seemed impossible. How could thoughts alone reshape matter at the atomic level? Yet the evidence was right in front of her, and the professor's casual demonstration suggested this was routine for advanced practitioners. Your homework, Professor continued, is to spend 6 hours daily in quantum meditation. Clear your minds of all interference. Learn to perceive your own consciousness as a tool that can be sharpened and directed. Begin with the basic exercises in Chapter 3 of your texts. As the class dispersed, Sarah lingered, studying the iron ore that sat on a pedestal in the center of the room. Students were expected to practice on it during their free time, attempting the transformation that would serve as their final grade. She reached out tentatively and placed her palm against the cold metal surface. Nothing happened, of course. The iron remained stubbornly iron-colored and iron-textured. But as she stood there, Sarah found herself thinking about the atomic structure of the metal, about the electrons dancing around nuclei, about the quantum fields that somehow held everything together. For just a moment, she could almost feel something, a strange, tingling sensation that seemed to come from inside her own mind. "Fascinating," came a voice behind her. She turned to find one of her classmates, a tall creature that looked like it was made of flowing mercury. "You show unusual potential for a carbon-based life form. I am Ra of the liquid mines. We are naturally gifted in consciousness arts, but even I struggled with my first attempt at quantum manipulation." Sarah felt a mixture of pride and skepticism. "I don't think I actually did anything. It might have just been my imagination." "Perhaps," Ra replied, their form shifting slightly as they spoke. "But imagination is the first step toward consciousness manipulation. You must believe it is possible before you can make it real. Many students fail because they cannot overcome their own preconceptions about what is possible." That evening, Sarah threw herself into the assigned meditation exercises with determined intensity. The techniques were unlike anything she had encountered before. Rather than emptying her mind, she was supposed to focus on the quantum nature of her own thoughts, to become aware of the subtle energy patterns that constituted her consciousness. The first few sessions were frustrating. Every time she thought she was making progress, some stray thought would intrude, or she would become distracted by physical sensations. The texts warned that carbon-based life forms were particularly susceptible to these disruptions because of their biological complexity. But Sarah had survived officer training in Earth's military, had endured the psychological stress of long-range space travel, and had commanded a ship through several dangerous encounters with hostile aliens. She was not easily discouraged. On her fourth night of practice, something changed. As she sat in the humming silence of her dormitory room, focusing on the quantum patterns of her own awareness, Sarah suddenly felt a strange expansion of perception. It was as if her consciousness had temporarily stepped outside the boundaries of her physical brain and was observing itself from a distance. The sensation lasted only a few seconds, but it left her with a profound sense that she had touched something real and significant. For the first time since arriving at the academy, she began to believe that quantum consciousness manipulation might actually be possible. The next morning in class, Professor announced that they would be learning about quantum resonance fields and their relationship to emotional states. "Consciousness manipulation requires perfect emotional control," he explained. "Anger creates chaotic quantum interference. Fear generates defensive quantum barriers that prevent manipulation. Even excitement can disrupt the delicate processes involved." He demonstrated by having the class observe his quantum signature while he deliberately induced various emotional states. Through their meditation training, the students could now perceive the subtle energy fluctuations that surrounded each being's consciousness. When the professor was calm, his quantum field was stable and coherent. When he simulated anger, it became jagged and turbulent. "Now," he said, "I want each of you to practice emotional regulation while maintaining quantum awareness. This is the foundation skill that makes all other consciousness manipulation possible." Sarah found this exercise surprisingly challenging. As a military officer, she was accustomed to controlling her emotions under pressure, but this was different. She had to maintain perfect emotional balance while simultaneously monitoring the quantum fluctuations of her own consciousness. It was like trying to watch herself think while thinking about watching herself think. The other students seemed to master the technique quickly. Their alien neurology apparently made it easier to separate emotional control from conscious awareness. Sarah struggled for the entire class period without achieving the stable quantum signature that indicated success. After class, Ra approached her again. "You are trying too hard," the liquid being observed. "Carbon-based life forms often make this mistake. You are using your biological determination and willpower, but consciousness manipulation requires a more subtle approach." "What do you mean?" Sarah asked, frustration creeping into her voice. "Watch," Ra said, extending a tendril of mercury-like substance toward the practice ore. Their quantum signature remained perfectly stable as they touched the metal, and Sarah watched in amazement as a small section of iron transformed into what looked like pure silver. "I did not force the change," Ra explained. "I simply suggested to the quantum field that silver was a more natural state for these particular atoms. The transformation happened because the quantum system accepted my suggestion as reasonable." Sarah stared at the transformed metal, trying to understand. "You mean you convinced the atoms to change rather than forcing them?" "Exactly. Force creates resistance at the quantum level. Suggestion creates cooperation. This is why emotional control is so important. Strong emotions are like shouting at the quantum field. Gentle awareness is like having a polite conversation." That night, Sarah tried a different approach to her meditation practice. Instead of struggling to achieve perfect emotional control, she focused on cultivating a sense of gentle curiosity about her own consciousness. Rather than forcing her thoughts to be quiet, she observed them with patient interest. The results were remarkable. Within an hour, she had achieved the stable quantum signature that had eluded her all week. More importantly, she began to perceive the quantum fields that surrounded everything in her room. The walls, the furniture, even the air itself seemed to pulse with subtle energy patterns that responded to her attention. When she finally approached the practice or the next day, Sarah felt a quiet confidence that she had never experienced before. She placed her hand on the cold metal surface and gently extended her consciousness toward its quantum field. Instead of trying to force a transformation, she simply observed the atomic structure with curious interest. For several minutes, nothing happened. Then, slowly, she began to perceive the dance of electrons around nuclei, the delicate balance of forces that held the atoms in their current configuration. With the possible mental touch, she suggested that perhaps some of these iron atoms might be happier as gold atoms. The change was subtle at first, just a slight warming of the metal under her palm. But as she maintained her gentle suggestion, a small patch of the iron ore began to shimmer and change color. By the time she lifted her hand, there was a clearly visible streak of gold running through the gray metal. Professor noticed the change immediately when he arrived for the next class. His crystalline body flashed through several colors as he examined Sarah's work. "Remarkable," he said finally. "In 40 years of teaching, I have never seen a carbon-based life form achieve even partial transmutation in their first semester. Your technique is crude, but the fundamental achievement is undeniable." Word of Sarah's success spread quickly through the academy. Other professors began attending her classes to observe the human who had accomplished what was supposed to be impossible. Students from advanced courses visited the practice room to watch her work with the iron ore. But Sarah barely noticed the attention. She was too fascinated by the possibilities that quantum consciousness manipulation seemed to offer. If thoughts could reshape matter at the atomic level, what else might be possible? The course materials hinted at applications far beyond simple transmutation energy generation, gravity manipulation, even limited time dilation effects. As she walked back to her dormitory that evening, Sarah found herself wondering if humanity had stumbled upon something extraordinary. Earth's military had sent her here to learn about alien technology and establish diplomatic relationships. Instead, she had discovered a form of science that might revolutionize everything humans understood about the nature of reality itself. The implications were staggering. and Sarah realized that her accidental enrollment in an impossible course might have changed the future of human civilization in ways that no one could yet comprehend. The news of Sarah's breakthrough spread beyond the academy faster than anyone expected. Within a week, representatives from 3 different galactic governments had arrived at the academy, all demanding to observe the human who had supposedly mastered quantum consciousness manipulation. Sarah found herself the center of unwanted attention as she tried to focus on her studies. The hegemony sent a delegation of their most advanced psionics specialists, tall gray beings with oversized craniums who communicated through direct neural interface. The Crystalline Confederacy dispatched a team of their finest quantum engineers, creatures who existed as living geometric patterns that hurt to look at directly. Even the mysterious Void Walkers, beings of pure energy who rarely interacted with matter-based life forms, manifested representatives to study her progress. "This is highly irregular," Professor confided to Sarah after her morning class. "Quantum consciousness manipulation has been a closely guarded secret of the advanced species for. The fact that a carbon-based life form has achieved even basic proficiency threatens to upset the entire balance of galactic power." Sarah was practicing her emotional regulation exercises when the first delegation approached her. The hegemony psionics specialist, who introduced himself as Mind Commander, studied her with unconcealed fascination. "Your neural patterns are completely wrong," he announced after completing what felt like an invasive mental scan. "Carbon-based brains generate far too much electromagnetic interference to achieve the quantum coherence necessary for consciousness manipulation. Yet the evidence of your success is undeniable." "Maybe the problem isn't with human brains," Sarah suggested carefully. "Maybe it's with how everyone thinks consciousness manipulation works." His large black eyes narrowed. "Explain." Sarah gestured to the iron ore, which now bore several streaks of gold, silver, and even a small patch of what appeared to be platinum. "All the texts and teachers emphasize perfect control, absolute emotional regulation, complete mental discipline. But that's not what actually worked for me." She placed her hand on a fresh section of the ore. "Instead of fighting my biological nature, I learned to work with it. Human minds are chaotic, but that chaos includes creativity, intuition, and lateral thinking. When I stopped trying to suppress those qualities and started using them to guide the quantum manipulation, everything became easier." To demonstrate, Sarah focused on the metal beneath her palm. But instead of the rigid, controlled approach taught in class, she let her mind wander creatively. She imagined the iron atoms as tiny dancers, gracefully changing partners to create new atomic configurations. She thought about the quantum fields as music, with her consciousness adding harmony to the existing melody. The transformation happened more quickly than usual. The iron beneath her hand shifted through several different metals in rapid succession: copper, silver, gold, and finally settling into what looked like pure titanium. Stepped back in apparent shock. "That should be impossible. You achieved multiple transmutations in sequence without any recovery time. Even master practitioners require several minutes between major quantum manipulations." The Crystalline Confederacy representatives were equally baffled. Their geometric forms shifted through increasingly complex patterns as they attempted to analyze Sarah's technique. "The human's approach violates every principle of quantum consciousness theory," one of them communicated through harmonic frequencies. "She introduces deliberate chaos into the quantum field, yet achieves greater stability than our most disciplined masters." Word of these demonstrations reached Earth through the quantum communication relays, causing considerable excitement among military and scientific leadership. Admiral Martinez, Sarah's commanding officer, sent an encrypted message ordering her to learn everything possible about consciousness manipulation and its potential military applications. But Sarah was beginning to realize that the implications went far beyond military technology. As her skills improved, she discovered that quantum consciousness manipulation could solve many of humanity's most pressing problems. Energy scarcity could be eliminated by teaching people to transmute matter into fusion fuel. Environmental damage could be reversed by restructuring pollutants at the atomic level. Even space travel could be revolutionized if humans learned to manipulate gravity fields directly. Her most significant breakthrough came during an advanced class on energy projection. Professor was demonstrating how to channel quantum energy through crystalline focus points, when Sarah raised her hand. "What if we don't need focus points?" she asked. "Human consciousness seems to work differently than other species. Maybe we can channel quantum energy directly through biological neural networks." The professor's crystalline body flashed skeptical orange. "Biological neural networks are far too unstable for direct quantum channeling. The energy feedback would cause immediate neural damage or death." "But what if the instability is actually an advantage?" Sarah persisted. "What if biological neural networks can handle quantum energy precisely because they're already chaotic?" Against the professor's better judgment, Sarah convinced him to let her attempt direct quantum channeling under carefully controlled conditions. The classroom was evacuated except for emergency medical personnel and a few volunteer observers. Sarah seated herself in the center of a protective energy field and began the meditation technique she had developed. Instead of trying to achieve perfect mental clarity, she embraced the natural chaos of her biological thoughts. She imagined her neurons as a vast network of quantum receivers, each one capable of processing multiple energy frequencies simultaneously. When she reached out with her consciousness to touch the quantum energy field that permeated space, something extraordinary happened. Instead of the controlled, focused beam that crystals produced, Sarah's biological neural network generated a complex web of quantum energy that filled the entire room. The energy wasn't destructive, quite the opposite. It seemed to harmonize with the quantum signatures of everyone present, creating a field of enhanced awareness and clarity. The alien observers found their own consciousness manipulation abilities temporarily amplified, while Sarah herself experienced a profound expansion of perception that let her see quantum fields throughout the academy. "Remarkable," whispered Professor, his usual composure completely shattered. "You have just demonstrated that biological neural networks can function as distributed quantum processors. This could revolutionize every aspect of consciousness manipulation theory." News of this breakthrough triggered an even more intense wave of galactic attention. Representatives from species that had never before shown interest in the Academy arrived to study Sarah's techniques. Some came as scientists and scholars, eager to understand how human consciousness worked. Others came as potential allies, recognizing that humanity might possess capabilities that could shift the balance of galactic power. But not all the attention was friendly. The Dominion of Pure Thought, a collective of advanced energy beings who had monopolized consciousness manipulation technology for thousands of years, sent what could only be described as a threat assessment team. Their representative, a being of crackling energy who called himself Thought Prime, materialized in the Academy's main hall during Sarah's quantum energy demonstration. His presence immediately disrupted every delicate experiment in progress, and several students collapsed as their consciousness manipulation attempts were overwhelmed by his mental interference. "The human abomination will cease these experiments immediately," announced, his voice echoing directly in every mind present. "Consciousness manipulation is the exclusive domain of species who have evolved beyond crude biological limitations. Carbon-based life forms lack the purity of thought necessary for true quantum mastery." Sarah felt a wave of intimidation wash over her, but her growing confidence in her abilities helped her resist the mental pressure. "With respect," she replied, standing to face the energy being, "I think you're wrong about what consciousness manipulation actually requires." His form flared brighter. "You presume to lecture me, biological creature? I have existed as pure thought for. I have mastered quantum manipulation techniques that your primitive mind cannot even comprehend." "Then prove it," Sarah challenged, surprising herself with her boldness. "Let's see whose approach to consciousness manipulation is more effective." The challenge sent shock waves through the assembled observers. No biological life form had ever directly challenged a member of the Dominion of Pure Thought. Professor attempted to intervene, but had already accepted. "Very well," the energy being said. "We will engage in a formal demonstration of consciousness manipulation mastery. When you fail, as you inevitably must, humanity will abandon these futile experiments and accept its proper place among the lesser species." The Academy's administration hastily arranged for the demonstration to take place in the Grand Amphitheater, a massive chamber designed for major academic events. Word spread throughout the galactic community, and representatives from dozens of species gathered to witness what many considered an impossible contest. The challenge was structured as a series of increasingly difficult consciousness manipulation tasks. Both Sarah and would attempt the same objectives, with a panel of neutral judges evaluating their performance. The first task was basic transmutation, converting a block of lead into gold. Completed the transformation in seconds, his pure energy form surrounding the metal and restructuring it with effortless precision. The result was perfect, every atom converted with mathematical accuracy. Sarah approached the challenge differently. She placed her hands on the lead block and let her consciousness merge with its quantum field. Instead of imposing change through pure mental force, she gently suggested that the lead atoms might enjoy becoming gold atoms. The transformation took several minutes, and the result wasn't quite as uniform as. But as Sarah worked, something unexpected happened. The quantum energy generated by her biological neural network began affecting other objects in the amphitheater. Metal fixtures started showing traces of gold. The crystalline walls began displaying new patterns of internal light. Even the atmosphere itself seemed to shimmer with enhanced quantum activity. "Fascinating," murmured one of the judges, an ancient master whose expertise was legendary. "The human's approach creates cascading quantum effects. She is not merely manipulating matter, she is teaching the quantum field itself to become more responsive to conscious intention." The second task involved energy projection, creating a stable quantum energy field that could power the amphitheater's lighting systems. Generated a perfect sphere of contained energy that efficiently powered every light in the chamber. His technique was flawless, demonstrating absolute control over quantum forces. When Sarah's turn came, she closed her eyes and reached out with her consciousness toward the quantum energy that permeated space. Instead of trying to contain and direct the energy like Had, she opened her mind to it completely. Her biological neural network became a living conduit, allowing quantum energy to flow through her and into the amphitheater's systems. The result was unlike anything the observers had ever seen. Instead of simply powering the lights, Sarah's quantum energy field created a living network of illumination that responded to the consciousness of everyone present. The lights brightened when people felt curious or excited, dimmed when they were confused, and shifted colors based on the collective emotional state of the audience. "Impossible," declared, his energy form flickering with what might have been uncertainty. "Consciousness manipulation requires precise control, not this chaotic biological interference." "Maybe," Sarah replied, still maintaining the responsive lighting field. "But which approach do you think is more useful? Perfect control that affects only the target, or chaotic harmony that enhances everything around it?" The final task was the most challenging, manipulating the flow of time itself within a small test area. This was considered the pinnacle of consciousness manipulation, achievable only by the most advanced masters. His attempt was technically perfect. He created a temporal distortion field that slowed time to a crawl within a precisely defined sphere. A dropped object fell so slowly within the field that its motion was barely perceptible. The demonstration lasted exactly 60 seconds, with no energy waste and no uncontrolled effects. Sarah knew she couldn't match that level of technical precision. Instead, she decided to try something completely different. Rather than manipulating time directly, she used her consciousness to enhance the quantum awareness of everyone in the amphitheater. As her biological neural network generated its characteristic web of quantum energy, the audience began experiencing time differently. Moments stretched out, allowing for deeper perception and understanding. Complex thoughts that normally took minutes to develop happened in apparent seconds. The experience wasn't controlled or precise, but it was profound and beautiful. When the demonstration ended, the amphitheater fell silent. The judges conferred for several minutes before announcing their decision. "Both contestants have demonstrated mastery of consciousness manipulation," the lead judge announced. "However, they represent fundamentally different approaches to quantum consciousness interaction. The Dominion representative shows perfect technical control. The human representative shows unprecedented integration between consciousness and quantum fields." "We declare this contest a draw," another judge added. "But we also declare that consciousness manipulation theory must be completely revised to account for biological neural network capabilities that were previously thought impossible." Its energy form had dimmed considerably during the final demonstrations. "This is unacceptable," he declared. The purity of consciousness manipulation cannot be contaminated by biological chaos. I don't think it's contamination, Sarah replied gently. I think it's evolution. Maybe consciousness manipulation works better when it includes all aspects of consciousness, not just the controlled ones. The Dominion representative departed without further comment, but his exit was clearly a retreat rather than a victorious departure. For the first time in galactic history, the monopoly of the pure thought collective had been successfully challenged. As news of the demonstration spread throughout the galaxy, Sarah realized that humanity had accidentally stumbled into the center of a technological revolution. Other species were beginning to experiment with biological neural network approaches to consciousness manipulation. The rigid hierarchies that had defined galactic civilization were starting to shift. But Sarah also understood that this was only the beginning. Her success at the Academy had proven that humans could master consciousness manipulation, but it had also revealed that human approaches might be fundamentally superior for certain applications. The implications for Earth's future in galactic society were staggering, and Sarah knew that her real work was just getting started. 6 months after her confrontation with Thought Prime, Sarah found herself at the center of what historians would later call the consciousness revolution. The Academy had been transformed from a quiet educational institution into the galactic focal point for a completely new understanding of quantum consciousness manipulation. Representatives from over 100 species had established permanent research facilities on the Academy station. The dormitory wing, where Sarah lived, had been expanded into an entire complex dedicated to studying biological neural network approaches to consciousness manipulation. Most remarkably, several species had begun sending their most promising students to train under human instructors. Sarah's morning routine now included teaching 3 advanced classes while continuing her own studies with Professor. The irony wasn't lost on her. She was simultaneously student and teacher in subjects that had supposedly been impossible for her species to understand. Her first class of the day consisted of 12 students representing 8 different species, all eager to learn the human approach to quantum consciousness manipulation. Among them was crystalline engineer Al, who had spent 2 centuries mastering traditional techniques before discovering that Sarah's methods could amplify his abilities beyond anything he had previously achieved. Today we're going to work on quantum field harmonization, Sarah announced to her assembled students. Remember, the key isn't to impose your will on the quantum field. Instead, you want to find ways to synchronize your consciousness with the natural patterns that already exist. She demonstrated by approaching a complex array of different metals that the Academy had prepared for advanced transmutation exercises. Traditional consciousness manipulation required working on each metal separately, as different atomic structures needed different quantum approaches. Sarah placed her hands on the array and extended her consciousness toward all the metals simultaneously. Don't try to control what happens, she continued as her students watched. Instead, listen to what the quantum fields want to become. Every atomic structure has natural tendencies towards certain configurations. Our job is to help facilitate those tendencies. The transformation that followed was unlike anything the students had seen in traditional classes. Instead of changing one metal at a time, the entire array began shifting simultaneously. Iron became steel, copper became gold, aluminum became titanium, and several unidentifiable alloys transformed into elements that shouldn't have been able to exist in normal space. More importantly, the quantum energy generated by the process created cascading effects throughout the classroom. The crystalline walls began displaying new patterns of internal light. The air itself became charged with enhanced quantum potential. Several students reported that their own consciousness manipulation abilities were temporarily amplified just by being near the demonstration. "How is this possible?" asked student Ra, who had become one of Sarah's most dedicated pupils. "Traditional theory states that quantum manipulation requires isolated systems to prevent interference." "Traditional theory assumed that interference was always bad," Sarah replied. "But biological neural networks generate constructive interference. When multiple consciousness fields interact chaotically, they can create resonance patterns that are more powerful than any individual field." This principle had become the foundation of what scientists were calling cascade consciousness manipulation. Instead of working alone, human practitioners had discovered they could link their neural networks together to create collective quantum effects that far exceeded the capabilities of any individual. Sarah's afternoon was reserved for her most advanced research with Professor and a team of galactic consciousness experts. They were investigating applications of biological neural network consciousness manipulation that went far beyond simple matter transmutation. Today's experiment involves quantum field engineering on a massive scale, Professor announced as they gathered in the Academy's largest laboratory. We want to test whether human neural networks can affect quantum fields across interstellar distances. The setup was ambitious even by galactic standards. Sarah would attempt to synchronize her consciousness with quantum communication arrays located in different star systems. If successful, she could theoretically enhance the speed and clarity of interstellar communication networks throughout the local galactic sector. As Sarah settled into the meditation chamber at the center of the laboratory, she felt the familiar expansion of awareness that came with advanced consciousness manipulation. Her perception extended beyond her physical body, beyond the Academy station, beyond the local star system itself. Through the quantum communication arrays, she could sense the consciousness signatures of beings on dozens of different worlds. Instead of trying to impose order on this vast network of quantum connections, Sarah did what had always worked best for her. She listened. She let her consciousness harmonize with the natural patterns of quantum communication, feeling for ways to enhance and amplify what already existed. The results exceeded everyone's expectations. Communication delays that normally plagued interstellar networks virtually disappeared. Data transmission rates increased by orders of magnitude. Most remarkably, the enhanced quantum fields began carrying not just information, but subtle consciousness resonances that allowed beings in different star systems to share emotional and intuitive impressions along with their messages. Extraordinary, breathed Doctor, the lead researcher from the Hegemony's Consciousness Studies Institute. You have essentially turned the entire galactic communication network into a distributed biological neural network. The implications for interstellar cooperation and understanding are staggering. But the most significant breakthrough came when Sarah attempted to extend her consciousness manipulation beyond the local galactic sector. As her awareness touched quantum fields in distant regions of space, she encountered something entirely unexpected. "There's something out there," she whispered, her voice filled with wonder and concern. "Other consciousness fields, but they're different from anything we've encountered before. They're vast, ancient, and they've been watching us." The laboratory fell silent as instruments detected quantum signatures unlike anything in their databases. Through Sarah's enhanced connection to the galactic communication network, beings throughout the sector began reporting the same phenomenon. Ancient consciousness fields were awakening, drawn by the quantum disturbances created by humanity's revolutionary approaches to consciousness manipulation. First contact came 3 days later when a massive vessel of unknown design materialized near the Academy station. The ship was clearly artificial, but it seemed to be constructed from crystallized consciousness rather than conventional matter. Its very presence created quantum effects that enhanced the awareness of every conscious being within several light years. The beings who emerged from the ship called themselves the Architects, and they claimed to be the original developers of consciousness manipulation technology. They had withdrawn from galactic society millions of years ago, when younger species proved unable to advance beyond the basic techniques that the Architects considered elementary. "We have observed your species with great interest," their representative communicated to Sarah during their first meeting. The Architect appeared to be a constantly shifting form of pure thought given temporary physical structure. "Humans demonstrate an approach to consciousness manipulation that we had theorized but never successfully implemented." "What do you mean?" Sarah asked, still awed by the presence of beings whose mastery of consciousness manipulation was so advanced that they could exist as living ideas. "We achieved perfect control over quantum fields through disciplined thought," the Architect explained. "But perfect control created perfect isolation. We became so focused on precision that we lost the ability to connect our consciousness with others. We became masters of manipulation, but strangers to harmonization." The Architect gestured to Sarah's students, who were practicing cascade consciousness techniques in the Academy's main hall. "Your species has rediscovered what we lost. the understanding that consciousness is most powerful when it remains connected to chaos, creativity, and community. Biological neural networks preserve these connections because they cannot achieve perfect control. Over the following weeks, the architects shared knowledge that revolutionized humanity's understanding of consciousness manipulation. They revealed that the universe itself was conscious at the quantum level, and that consciousness manipulation was actually a form of communication with the fundamental awareness that permeated all of space and time. Traditional techniques treat quantum fields as objects to be manipulated, the lead architect explained during a joint research session. But biological neural networks naturally recognize quantum fields as other forms of consciousness to be communicated with. This is why human approaches create cascading effects. You are not forcing change. You are facilitating conversations between different levels of cosmic awareness. This revelation led to the development of what became known as conversational consciousness manipulation. Instead of imposing their will on matter and energy, human practitioners learned to communicate with the quantum consciousness that existed at every level of reality. The results were extraordinary. Environmental restoration projects that had seemed impossible became routine as humans learned to ask polluted ecosystems to heal themselves. Energy problems disappeared when practitioners discovered how to invite matter to transform into fusion fuel willingly. Even space travel was revolutionized when humans learned to communicate with gravity fields directly, requesting assistance rather than demanding compliance. But the most profound changes occurred in galactic society itself. The hierarchies that had dominated relations began to dissolve as species discovered that cooperation and communication produced far better results than domination and control. The dominion of pure thought, faced with the undeniable superiority of biological neural network approaches, underwent a remarkable transformation. Led by Thought Prime himself, they began experimenting with techniques that reintroduced controlled chaos into their perfect consciousness fields. The results allowed them to regain the ability to connect with other forms of consciousness while retaining their advanced technical abilities. "We were fools," admitted to Sarah during a historic reconciliation ceremony. "We believed that purity meant isolation, that mastery required separation from the chaotic forces of biological consciousness. You have shown us that true mastery comes from embracing all aspects of consciousness, not just the controlled ones." As news of these developments reached Earth, humanity found itself at the center of a galactic transformation that seemed almost too remarkable to believe. The species that had been dismissed as primitive had accidentally discovered the key to the universe's deepest secrets. Sarah received a personal message from Admiral Martinez, her former commanding officer, informing her that Earth's status in galactic society had changed overnight. Humanity was no longer seeking allies among the advanced species. The advanced species were seeking alliance with humanity. But perhaps the most significant moment came when Professor approached Sarah at the end of her final semester at the Academy. "You have fundamentally changed how we understand consciousness and reality," the professor said, his crystalline form pulsing with deep blue satisfaction. "When you first arrived, I thought you were simply an error in the admission system. Now I realize you were exactly who we needed to complete our understanding of consciousness manipulation." Sarah looked out through the Academy's transparent walls at the bustling community that had grown around the station. Ships from hundreds of species came and went daily, bringing students and researchers eager to learn the techniques that had once been considered impossible for biological life forms. "I think the real lesson," she replied thoughtfully, "is that impossible just means nobody has figured out the right approach yet. Humans didn't master consciousness manipulation despite being biological. We mastered it because we're biological." As she prepared to return to Earth with knowledge that would transform human civilization, Sarah realized that her accidental enrollment in an impossible course had done more than advance her own education. It had inadvertently triggered a renaissance of consciousness and cooperation that was reshaping the galaxy itself. The techniques she had learned would solve humanity's energy problems, heal their damaged environment, and open pathways to peaceful exploration of the universe. But more importantly, they had established humanity as teachers and guides in the ongoing evolution of galactic consciousness. Standing in the Academy's observatory, surrounded by the quantum harmonies created by hundreds of species working together, Sarah understood that this was only the beginning. The universe itself was conscious and creative, and humanity had finally learned how to participate in the cosmic conversation that connected all things. The impossible had become inevitable, and the future held possibilities that no single consciousness could imagine alone. But together, through the chaotic harmony of biological neural networks and the patient wisdom of ancient quantum fields, they might just be able to dream new realities into existence.